Hi, thanks for coming. My name is Karma Glos, and with my husband Michael and my daughter Rosemary, we run Kingbird Farm, which is in upstate New York near Ithaca, in the Finger Lakes region. We've been there for 20 years now. I still feel like a beginning farmer, but I have a couple of ideas under my belt that I guess I'll share today. One of the main things I want to start out with, and I always start out with this on any of my talks, is that any of the projects that we do are small. Our farm is made up of a lot of small projects, a lot of small enterprises, and that's what's made us functional and very successful over these last 20 years. I never wanted to focus on one thing. I always wanted to have my fingers in a lot of pots. And for a small farm in unsure economic times, that's been really helpful because we can adjust the farm according to what the customers want and according to what we want. As first-generation farmers, I think that's something that we tend to do. We came into this because we wanted to. So if it's not something we enjoy, we stop doing it. And that's a little bit different idea than some of the older farmers who stay in it because of entropy sometimes. So our farm has changed a lot over the years as we've tried different things. So try to keep that in mind as I go over the herb business, which is just one of the aspects of what we do. All right. So just as an example of the diversity on the farm is that we do beef cattle, thank you, and we do hogs, and we do laying hens, and meat chickens, and ducks, and silkies, and culinary herbs, and plants, and forest products. So it's a very large diversity. Here's a view of the farm from up on top. We have 100 acres. Approximately 80 of it is wooded. And we chose this location on purpose because we wanted to be buffered by woods on all sides. But it does mean that it's a rocky hillside farm with dubious soil quality in some places, but we've been working on that for 20 years. So we try to do a lot with just 20 acres. The woods do provide us with some crops like ramps, fiddleheads, mushrooms, and lumber, but primarily we just have this 20 open acres. So here's, again, what I was just talking about, an example of the livestock that we do are the Tamworth hogs, Scottish Highland beef, Pekin ducks, those are our Kingbirds, which is our own meat breed, potted culinary herbs, cut culinary herbs. One of our biggest new things is houseplants. Apparently, the new generation loves houseplants, and so do I, so it's a perfect match. And then we do just an acre of market vegetables. I want to start out with an example of this year's sales so you can get a feel for what portion of our farm this is. Generally, the things like plant production and vegetable production have the lowest gross numbers compared to like beef and pork, but the highest net numbers. So whereas, maybe I only did $18,000 in plant sales this year, that's so much more net in the long run than $30,000 worth of pork. It really, there's a lot less input into my plant business. And I'll go into that a little bit later about how I've tried to minimize inputs and utilize our own farm more as an input than buying things in. We do our standbys, tomatoes and peppers and eggplants. Primarily those get sold right away at farmer's market. But my real true love are the tropicals and the houseplants and the herbs. And they're strategically sold throughout the season to try to round out my plant season as much as possible. I don't want to just do spring bedding plants. I do a big plant sale in the summer, but most of the time I'm at the Ithaca Farmers Market. So I have a limited space to sell things, and I want to be able to sell things at my stall pretty much all season. The newest, biggest thing that I've been doing, like I said, is the houseplants. That's the fastest growing percentage of my sales, and I don't know how long I can ride that wave. They're very hip now, but hip things are dangerous because all of a sudden they could not be hip anymore. So I have invested a little bit into houseplants. I have a year-round conservatory now where I can overwinter all my mother plants, which is so very challenging in the Northeast. So even if that doesn't get much higher, it's still a pretty good percentage of my plant sales. And then of herbs overall, you can see the breakdown there. So primarily it's in the herb plants themselves. That's my biggest sales. And then a little bit into fresh cut and a little bit into dry herbs. The dry herbs, though, I have stock still. I've sold $1,000 worth so far this season. But I have still most of the stock for starting in the spring when I don't have fresh ones yet. So you can see it's not a huge percentage of my business, but I never poo-poo any of these little bits because they all add up to make the farm work the way it does. And I'll show later that some of these herb things, even though I don't sell them, have a great value to us on the farm. There's the farm right now. Just to give an example of the lay of the land, we generally graze on the bottom portion of our farm, down sort of where the red barn is. And then the upper portion of the farm has the vegetable fields and the greenhouses. We have multiple high tunnels. None of these are year-round. They're all seasonal. These are our main high tunnels right now. The one on the left is just a small heated propagation house. That's the only one that's heated except for the conservatory, and I don't start that up until April. And I'll show you my light benches later. So I try not to use much propane. I'm very stingy. And one of the things that I notice with all of my plants is that they're smaller and tougher than most of the stuff at farmer's market or at the plant sale. So I'm usually way behind everybody else. They've all got tomato plants this tall and mine are still seedlings. But in the long run, I end up having a smaller, tougher plant that does better and doesn't get all rangy. And so I always tell people, I torture my plants a bit. So they're going to do well for you because I've toughened them up. So one of the ways I do that is I do not heat my high tunnel very much. The middle one, the big high tunnel, the Taj Mahal, that's actually an in-ground perennial house. It is not heated, but the thermal mass of such a giant greenhouse helps overwinter things that are even zone 8. Last year I had lemon verbena coming back. That was mind-blowing. I don't think that's going to happen this year because it was -20 early in the season, so we'll see. And then I have some of these small temporary high tunnels that we move around. We have this one, and then we have a couple of hoovers, which are movable in the field, and we can put them in various places. And then this is the conservatory. This is helping keeping me in the Northeast and not fleeing home after 20 years. I finally got my conservatory. So this is year-round. It's not only overwintering my house plant mother plants and all the succulents, it's also overwintering a lot of my herb mother plants that aren't hardy. So lemon verbena, fruit sage, pomegranates, passion flowers, all the different scented geraniums, all these things that I want cuttings from in the spring, so I can do my own starts, but they're a little harder to overwinter than, say, sage. So a lot of those are down on the bottom floor because they don't need that much heat. And then the succulents and tropicals are on the top, and that thing is packed to the freaking gills. And I was very hesitant because I'm very conservative about spending money to support my business because I want to make money on this really a lot. It's my favorite. So one thing is we just don't use much propane, and I was freaked out about this new house because it's year-round and it was -20 out. But even during the coldest part of the season, we're using about $7 worth of propane a day to heat this house. And for the value of the plants that's in there, it's been worth it. So I think it's going to be okay. It's built real well. You have a question way in the back there?
Yeah, could you just explain what this, I'm having a hard time figuring out what I'm looking at. Like the design.
Yeah. It's a shed roof, polycarbonate and glass greenhouse off my house. So the log house in the back is our house, and it shed roofs off that. It's 16 feet wide and 11 feet deep. But you're right, it's an odd perspective, isn't it?
And this front part, I'm assuming, is glass.
Yeah, the sides are glass, the top is polycarbonate. So it has very high R value because it's on my house. I don't want it super cold, and I didn't want to spend any money on propane. South. Yep. I access it from inside the house. Exactly. The external doors were just completely sealed up for the winter.
So the glass is on it right there in that picture. Inside.
The glass. Yep.
Do you squeegee? That's like clearest glass I've ever seen.
It's very well. That's one reason why I wanted glass. I wanted it very clear. Yeah. What I really wanted was a Hartley Botanic Victorian greenhouse, but I didn't get that. So this is second best. I wanted it to be nice looking, but really reasonably priced. And
There's sort of a walking area in the center where you can, like a horseshoe.
yep. Gosh, I didn't know you guys would be so interested in this, or I would have included more. I was just like, this is new. It's really just new, just brand new. I just moved my plants in December, which was really big. You can see out the windows of my house now. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it doesn't help to heat my house. No.
And clearly, we're all really interested in this. So, did you base that off, like, was there a resource that you based the design off of, or where did you
Yeah,
get the
Don
idea?
Hughes, Northland Sheep Dairy. He designed my greenhouse. He's going to kill me for saying that. But he designed it because they have sort of a sunroom kind of thing off the front of their house. And then my other neighbor, Jake, he built it. So it's purely a custom job. Yeah.
The shells seem to be they're tilted.
They are not. It's an optical illusion.
Oh, okay, so they're straight.
Yeah, they're flat mesh. Was there one more back there before I move on from this?
Can you talk a little bit about the cost of the conservatory?
Well, it's an interesting question because we haven't paid Jake yet. He's not quite finished, so we're not going to pay him till he's finished. You heard it here. No, I think the estimate is about $10,000. It's a fairly expensive structure, but we wanted to do it really, really well and really tight, and the R value had to be really high. It's those glass blanks that are pretty expensive. That's triple wall polycarbonate, as high quality as I could get. There's a 4-foot gravel ditch around it, so it's got really good drainage. I just wanted to pull out all the stops and make it as high quality as possible, and one of the reasons was it's on my house, and the second is all my babies are in there. You know, I have been collecting succulents for years, and I needed a place where I felt they were really safe, and I could really monitor the temperature and light, and so that's the estimate. I don't know if he'll come in under that or over that, but that's okay, because I saved a long time for it. Yeah.
And what kind of irrigation do you use? Manual or like
Yeah.
drip or-
Yeah, I just use a hose in there. Yeah, I have a hydrant, frost-free hydrant inside. Well, next year I'll do a whole workshop just on conservatories, okay? But it is the pentultimate of plant growers' love. I mean, it's just like, and it helps me over winter here to be able to go into that. Something's blooming every day. I used to go up to the Taj, my in-ground perennial house, and just kind of hang around the half-dead plants and go, ah. But this is even better. It's because I'm from the Pacific Northwest, where it's always green, and it's been kind of hard to live here. So find the green where I can. All right, this is the high tunnel where I grew the vast majority of my herbs. I'm building a new one this year because this has been here for over 15 years. It's starting to show a lot of wear, but oh man, do I pull a lot of plants out of this structure. Don't ask me about sizes. I'll make stuff up. I think this thing's like 20 by 30 or something like that. I know that's probably wrong. My fact checker, my husband, is not here, so I don't actually know how long they are. But this is a divided house. The front, there's doors between it, and the front is heated, and the back portion is not, so that I can harden plants off. And it also means I'm only heating like a 20 by 10 foot space, and the rest of it's unheated. And then here's the Taj, the in-ground perennial house. This is a large house. This one is more like, it's almost 90 feet long, and I think it's 30 feet wide. It's a big house. And this was part of a SARE grant that we got nearly when we started farming, was to build this house to overwinter tender perennial herbs. So I have, rosemary growing in here and some more, zone 7 and 8 herbs that wouldn't overwinter outdoors. This also enables me to have mother plants that are actively growing in February and March so I can take cuttings. And that's, in a good year, I don't have to buy any plugs in from anywhere. My idea always is to be able to start all of my own cuttings. I really prefer to do that. Some years I have some sort of disaster. Last year, the doors of the Taj blew open in the winter, and pretty much everything was not necessarily destroyed, but it meant that the mother plants just had nothing green on them when it was time to take cuttings. And I really struggled. I could make enough for a couple plants, but so I bought plugs in that year. But this one is unheated. But because of its thermal mass, because of its size, is why you can overwinter in the ground here. We tried it in smaller hoop houses when we did the initial grant, and it would not work. There's too much edge effect in a small house. You need a big house with thermal mass. Yeah.
Do you do anything around the perimeter for frost protection?
No, we just roll down the sides.
But I mean,
Generally,
in the ground.
huh?
In the ground.
No.
Okay.
I don't think in this house. There is a French drain on the uphill side that's 4-foot ditch full of rocks to keep the water out. But we don't see much frost heave in it. I think the posts are in pretty high. This is a Rimmel house. It's done real well for us. Yeah?
Can I ask one question?
Go for it.
Can you just list like a couple of other herbs that you also overwinter in that high tunnel?
Absolutely. So like lemon thyme, which doesn't usually do real well for me outside. I have a Bergarten, a more wide leaf sage that does well in there, whereas like the regular garden sage outside is just not as high a quality as the Bergarten. Rosemary, that's my favorite herb in the whole world, and my daughter is actually named Rosemary, so I had to have rosemary. The tarragon comes up really, really early. I like that. I have, you're gonna scare it right out of me. Hopefully there'll be more pictures. But in here, you can see there's thyme, 2 different kinds of sage, and then rosemary in the back, and then calendula. The calendula starts self-seeding and blooming in March. It's amazing. And I'll have some more pictures of the actual plants in here later. And this is sort of the miracle of my potting mix right here. This is an important part of the whole operations, not just the greenhouses, but the soil that I then grow the potted plants in is all made on farm, and I think I've been successful because of it. It's variable. The one thing you can say about making your own potting mix is that it's going to be a lot more variable than if you buy McEnroe, which I use early in the spring when I need a very consistent, balanced thing for seedlings. I've found when I use my own mix, it's too hot. There's too much of a chance of damping off. So for brand new seedlings, I do buy in a mix, but I only need like a couple bags for those initial plug trays. So what this is our compost made of all of our chicken offal. So we slaughter between 500 and 1,000 birds a season on farm, and we keep all their blood, their feathers, their heads. So we have bone meal, feather meal, and blood meal inherent on the farm, which we can utilize. So we compost that, and generally 2 years before it's used in a greenhouse. It's mixed with animal manure, like generally horse manure, and straw, because you need a good carbon-nitrogen ratio to make sure that it composts properly. So we do a real hot, intense composting for that first year, because it's got to be to break down bones and big masses of feathers. And then over the second year, we let the worms back in and start, building it up into this beautiful black gold. This is when it's windrowed, that second year. And this is what it looks like when it's done. This is after it's been screened, so the bigger bones and skulls have been screened out, but you'll still get an occasional little toe bone or something. We compost all of our animal losses, so be it piglets or when we have to cull whole chickens, or they all go in that compost. So sometimes I have some fairly large bones that I have to screen out because it can freak out customers. But this is rich stuff. This is primo stuff, and so the reason I make my own is because we're a livestock farm. It would be inane to bring nutrients onto the farm. I have so much, I just have to figure out how to use it properly. But again, it's a challenge because I'm mixing my own. I don't always know what this compost is like. We have it tested occasionally, but every batch is different. So it can be a bit of a crapshoot. So after screening, I store it in the hoop house in bags so that I can make my mixes in the spring. And that's an example of my mix. I do really small batches every time I need it, basically. This is usually the intern's most hated job, is having to make potting mix every week. Because I don't have a big facility to store it, so we just do small batches as needed.
What do you put in a pot?
Dun, ta-da. So this is my basic recipe. It involves 2 buckets of coir. And the reason I use coir is from a basic sustainability platform. My handouts, which I didn't leave out here because they're kind of specific, and if you want one, come and pick them up afterwards. But what I included is this list that I made many, many years ago of all, greenhouse amendments that you might use, and sort of what is their environmental impact of using them, and how can I reduce that as much as possible. Okay, I'm going to use my own nutrients. I'm not going to be bringing in manure. That's awesome. Okay, what's going to be my bulking agent? Peat moss? I don't feel good about peat moss, do I? I didn't know, really. I thought it was bad. So I did a lot of research, and I made this list of different alternatives where things come from. And one of the things that I discovered was that even though peat moss is farmed right up there in Canada, that the environmental impact of coir, which comes on a boat from Indonesia, is lower than trucking peat moss down from Canada. And the coir is a secondary product of making rope and doing other things with coconut fiber. So I decided to try that. And I'm quite pleased with it. You want to get really high quality coir because it can be salty, and that's not pretty. And you want to rinse it really well. So we still do use a little bit of peat moss. I use a bucket. It helps balance my pH. A lot of times the plants I'm growing like a little bit more acid, and when I was using just coir, they weren't happy. So I add a little peat moss too. And then 3 buckets of my own compost, 2 buckets of perlite, but that depends on what kind of mix I'm making. I do jiggle these a little bit according to, am I doing houseplants? Am I doing, tomatoes that want a lot to eat? Am I doing peppers that are slower to grow? I mean, it does vary a bit. And then that's soft rock phosphate and green sand are my 2 mineral amendments.
So if those are 1 cup, how big is your bucket?
5-gallon bucket.
White sulfate?
Soft rock phosphate. Say that 10 times fast. Then that's to balance the phosphorus. Here's the type of coir that I use. Fiber dust, I've found it to be really clean. Except for sometimes I find those little glass bracelets that women wear in Southeast Asia. I find little bits of those in there. It's really fun. Or creepy, depending on how you look at it. But I found this one, I buy it by the pallet, and keep it in my greenhouse, and I've really liked that one. The other thing I do really neurotically to make sure that this business stays profitable for me is I recycle everything. I do not buy plastic pots. I do not buy plastic flats. I do not buy plastic. Sam, I am. So these are all recycled or reused. There's a pot swap in our town that is held by Cooperative Extension, and I don't take things there. I take things away. So I go with my truck and take plug trays and pots and anything else that I can get my hands on. So if I'm going to use any kind of plastic, it always comes from a situation like that. Or my customers bring them all back to me, which has been really helpful too, and they're pleased to do that. So I really like reusing and recycling. It means you have to keep them clean. You have to not accept things that look like they're covered with old chemical nitrogen, things like that. But if you clean them up, what was that? I don't sterilize them. I just clean them, water. Yeah, I don't believe in sterilizing. That's my greenhouse philosophy. Everybody has their own. But the one year that I was like, oh, I'm new, I'm young, I have to sterilize everything, I had the worst damping off of my life. everything damped off. So I'm more like more of a biodiverse reality. I'm just not a very clean person, so it doesn't really work for me to sterilize everything. And I don't have a sterile soil mix, so why bother? Yeah.
That was going to be my question. If a grower is using a sterile soil mix,
Yeah.
would you say in that case it would make more sense to sterilize their trays?
Perhaps, yeah, because you're starting at ground zero. Yeah. Yeah, but my greenhouses are all open. Things are coming and going. I really don't have a sterilized situation. Here's Rosie. She's sorting the pots at the end of the season. We try to reuse everything, empty it out, compost stuff that can be composted. And then if any plastic that can no longer be used, and sometimes I stack trays 5 deep before I give up on them, then we'll finally have to take them to the recycling at the town dump. All right, I'll talk a little bit about where I start. I'll try to talk faster. I always run out of time. I'm really bad about that. So just a few of my favorite seed companies, and this is also on the handout if you end up wanting that, but it's right here. My method, since I try to use as many organic seeds as humanly possible, is I usually start with high mowing. They have all the basic herbs that I need, all the basic culinary herbs, and especially the herb seeds where I use a lot of, like dill, cilantro, basil. I get them all from high mowing. As far as like really intensely high quality medicinal herb seeds, I love turtle tree. There's some sort of magic going on at that farm, and those medicinal seeds are amazing. A lot of the medicinal herbs I used to buy from them, I now grow myself and save seed because the plants were just so amazing. Horizon, what is that? I don't know what that is. Thank you. I was like, I don't recognize that anymore. Yeah. Strictly Medicinal is who they are now. And they're a seed company out of Oregon. They also have really interesting high-quality seeds. Some of them are organic as well. Southern Exposure, I get a few weird things from, like papalo, epazote. Some of those odder herbs, it can be hard to find organic versions of. And then I get a few things from Johnny's occasionally. And then saved seed. I save a ton of seed. My daughter saves it. Rosemary always has these little packets in her back pocket. She's stealing seeds constantly. In fact, she's probably in Patagonia right now stealing seeds. That's where she is right now. So she just can't help it. She's just been a seed collector forever. So we have a lot of saved seed. And every year we try all kinds of new things from saved seed. Yeah.
So when you have to buy plugs, where do you buy the plugs?
It is on here, but Hillcrest is primarily where I've gotten them in the past, Hillcrest Nursery. Plugs, organic plugs. Yeah, so if for some reason I can't get enough cuttings of something, or one year my ground was contaminated with nematodes, so I didn't feel comfortable digging tarragon rootlets and growing tarragon plants for people, and I ordered plugs from them, and they were very high quality. But I do use organic plugs for sure. This is how the season starts. This is how I can not start the greenhouse until April, is that I start everything on light benches. This is just in our mudroom. They aren't heated except for one bench, but the lights, I think, heat it well enough to really increase the surface temperature of the soil. And this way I can start a lot of different things really early in the season. I grow a lot of cactus and aloe and agave from seed, and that stuff takes forever. So I start it in February. I'll be starting seeds the first week of February. Yep, back there.
I have a system kind of like that. It's always trouble to water it because I have to pull all the flowers out. Put
Yep.
them on the ground. Is that what you do too?
Yes, yes. So I have a trolley. I have a little trolley with 3 shelves that came from a hospital, and I put 3 trays on it at a time, and I wheel it into the kitchen, and I water each flat individually in the kitchen. But it also means that I get to work in the house the first 2 months of the season, and I'm not up in the propagation house in the snow. So, I can listen to the radio and hang out with the dogs and the parakeets, and, so it's a little extra labor to water, but it's easy to be in there. Now, the way that I maximize the use of this, go back, I'm sorry. Dun, da, da, da. My husband just built this out of oak. Make it strong. It's going to be heavy when it's full of plants.
Have you ever tried LED lights or just?
I have not. Now, the reason I've been using these for years is that, is that someone gave them to us. You know, sometimes you do something for years and years because that's what you had on hand. So somebody that was going out of business gave us all these lights. And they were just sitting in our barn for years, so I put them to work. And as I might replace bulbs, I may go to something else. But I like the heat that these create. If you just wanted light, yeah, you might want something more efficient. But I'm actually using the heat that these create as well.
And then another question, I can't really see, how is it all, are they wired together, hardwired, or is it?
No, they all go to, see these power strips? Each shelf goes to a power strip because I turn them off every night.
And it's all on one breaker, or?
Yeah. It's all in one breaker. I've not had a problem. Once I plugged a vacuum cleaner into the same outlet, and that blew it. But all these lights on one breaker has been fine, and I turn them off at night because I believe plants need nighttime. So they're regular fluorescent lights? Yep, they're regular fluorescent lights. They're not grow lights even. So this is how I get a lot of things started in a small space. These are channel trays. They don't take very much soil, so I can just buy, a few bags of McEnroe mix, like the Fort Light early in the season. It's really low in nutrients, and it's usually, I don't get any damping off in it. So I use that in these little tiny trays first thing in the season because my stuff is just too intense. And then I transplant up into plug trays. But each one of these little channels is a different thing. And because I grow such a vast variety, hundreds of different things, and I don't do big amounts of any of those things, I'll do them in these little channel trays and try to keep them separate, and then pick them out and put them into plug trays as I go along. In addition to that, I'm taking cuttings starting in February, and I do those in trays of perlite. So I'm doing passion flowers, scented geraniums, lemon verbenas, things like that, early in the season from my own mother plants. And I think I'll get an even perhaps bigger jump on the season because all those plants are now in the conservatory and they're not just holding for the winter, they're actually growing. So I think that the cuttings will be more vigorous. I don't. We're certified organic. We don't use any rooting hormone. I rely on time and good management for most of my things. These guys are in perlite, but they're rinsed with fresh water twice a day. And I stick spider plants in there. Now, this may be entirely an old wives' tale, but I've been told that there's a lot of rooting hormone coming out of spider plants while they're rooting. So I always stick a spider plant in there. And whether it's really helping or not, I have no idea. But then you have a spider plant when you're done, so I sell that. So no, mostly it's just good management, making sure nothing molds, and waiting time.
When you rinse with the clear water, you just pour it over top and let it drain out the bottom?
Yeah, the tray on the top has holes in the bottom. The tray on the bottom is solid. So I take that tray out, the top one, and I rinse it off in the sink and put it back in. Twice a day, yeah. Because otherwise you'll get mold growth because you're waiting a little bit longer to have that root growth without a rooting hormone.
And would you be willing to expound different plants that you root?
Well, primarily passion flowers. Anything that cannot be grown from seed, I have to grow from cuttings. And these tropicals I have to get started really early. So the passion flowers, lemon verbena, scented geraniums, fruit sage, pineapple sage, bay trees, citrus trees, all the more tender herbal type things that I sell. When I do the cuttings of, say, rosemary and sage and stuff, I do that a little bit later in the season because they don't have quite as long a grow out. And I think I have some pictures of that coming up. So after they germinate in those little trays, I pick them out and I put them in plug trays. We're now onto my potting mix. Now that they're actively growing, they need a little bit more. Now this is my own potting mix. Those are Anacampsaros. That's a succulent. There's the rosemary. So I do the rosemary the same way in trays of perlite, rinsing twice a day. And then once they start to root out, about an inch of roots at least, then I transfer them into plug trays. And I do this with rosemary, with some of my sages that don't produce seed. I can't do from seed. I do it, some of the, what do I say, thyme, I do an orange balsam thyme and a lemon thyme. So anything I can't get seed for, essentially. I prefer to grow from seed because it takes a lot less space. So here's the seedlings. Then the seedlings get moved out to the high tunnel finally in April. And we're only keeping the high tunnel really in the 40s. It's not very well heated, and I do that on purpose. I want everything to grow slow and strong. I don't want lots of excessive growth. There's a flat of catnip. So the catnip was all grown from seed. Those are the rosemary cuttings. And this variety is ARP. ARP has been pretty successful for me overwintering in ground in my big greenhouse. I've also done a little bit of French rosemary, and that's done okay too in milder years, but ARP is the hardiest. Some tricolor sage. This also has to be done from cuttings. And these are the passion flowers once they get potted on. Now the passion flowers, I put in plastic pots because I know I'm gonna have them at market coming back and forth for months. And so putting them in a more of a biodegradable pot is not real good because they just get handled too much over the months. And also because generally people that buy the passion flowers keep them in the pot for a while as well. So. But then everything that moves quickly out of my system, I use a cow pot. I'm moderately in love with cow pots. I've been very pleased with them. They can be planted directly into the ground. At the end of the season, any plants that I don't sell, I can just compost the whole kit and caboodle. I don't have to take anything out of pots. They probably add a tiny bit of nutrients from the cow manure as they grow. And they've held up really well. The key is to not take them to the farmer's market wet. You have to take them dry or they can't be handled, or they'll just become these horrible messes. So they've worked quite well for me. I've been pleased. I use the 4-inch cow pots for tomatoes and peppers and herbs that are going to move quickly. This is just an example of that I have this plastic curtain that divides my hoop house so that I only have to heat one section. That's my furnace for 15 years. It's done amazing. And this is the same brand that I bought for my new conservatory because I was so impressed how long this thing survived neglected like this in this hoop house and still performs. So this is Southern Burner. They hand make these in the South. And this is the vented type that you need a chimney for. The one in my new greenhouse is the non-vented type. They burn hotter and cleaner, but it's really important that you have a fresh air intake for those. So it's worth looking into those. I've been really, really impressed with how they work. And they're super small and lightweight and easy. Those greenhouses also all have roll-up sides. So this is how I control my air, my ventilation. I don't have automatic fans, nothing electrical in there. That heater doesn't require electricity. So if the power goes out, my greenhouses still function, which is important to me. I use old horse trailers to store things in, which is really, it's not that glamorous, but very practical because since I overwinter all my pots, I just keep reusing them. I need a good storage space. And keeping them in the greenhouse, they won't last nearly as long because they'll break down because of all the sun on them. So my goal, if I'm going to use plastic, is I'm going to, maximize the length of time that it will live. And this is one of the ways I do it. There's an example of the cow pot. I just can't say enough about them. I mean, I have varied feelings about supporting a large-scale commercial dairy, which is basically what you're doing when you buy them. But I think they're doing such amazing work with reutilizing their cow manure, and that I still think it's preferable to plastic. So, right from cow pots. It's the name of the company. Yep. I then use also a wide variety of trays since I don't buy anything. It can really vary on what I use. Bread trays work really great for big, heavy things like tomatoes. And I can take a whole bread tray of tomato plants to farmer's market. And the cow pots fit really nicely in those, so I use a fair bit of those. I used to use bulb crates for the larger things. As the season progresses, plants get into bigger and bigger pots. And so I'll start hauling things in bread trays. In bulb crates. And then when I need, I have a whole stash of 1-gallon pots and things like that that I've just been saving and saving every time I come across over the years. And sometimes you'll go to an auction and be able to buy, 10,000 pots for $10. Woo. And I'm like, I don't need those, but they're not going to go bad if I stash them in my horse trailers. And then someday I'm going to need them, and I'm going to go, yes, I have a stash of those. So, I use these half-gallon pots for my passion flowers because they need a little bit bigger space. One of the things about growing in the mixes that I grow in is that, I have to keep potting up because there's a limited nutrient bank in there. I'm not doing slow-release fertilizers or anything like that, and you can only do so much with fish emulsion. So what I do instead is I just keep potting them up and giving them more and more soil throughout the season. And of course, they go up in price. But initially, everything just goes out the door in 4-inch pots. It's my May pops. I have a couple of hardening off houses, just open-ended hoop houses. I don't recommend, putting plants outside for storage because too much rain and they just get leached out. And then you're going to lose even more nutrients. I also use wooden labels. This is probably one of the more neurotic things that I do because I hand write every single label. And last year I did over 6,000 labels. So it's a labor of love because I want to use wooden labels. By the end of the season, these are rotted out. They're gone. It's wonderful. And I don't feel bad sending them off because I know they're not going to become somebody's garbage. But it does mean I have to write them all. And what I do is I do that in the winter. An intern recommended this. Liz Coakley, you're amazing. She's like, why don't you just write them all in the winter? Why are we writing them now as we put them in the plants? I'm like, oh my God. So now in the winter, I watch movies and I write all my labels, all my tomatoes, all my peppers, all my main herbs. I still have to do some during the season, but I make these big packages of how many. I know I'm going to need 200 Roma tomato steaks. Why not make them now and watch some good movies? So that's what I do, and it works out great. These are the plants getting into a little bit bigger pots.
Where do you order your wooden labels from?
What was that?
Where do you order the wooden labels from?
A.M. Leonard.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I get the 6-inch natural wood boxes of 1,000. So on hold, they are more expensive than plastic labels, but they're also don't become garbage. So this is what the back of my truck looks like. So I can put flats in my market truck during the plant season. It works out really nicely. All my coolers with my meat go underneath, and the plants go on top. And then on big sale days, we'll take in an additional carload of plants as well. And of course, during the big plant sale, we take in a huge truck. We borrow another truck. This is basically my stall at farmer's market, which is really funny because I would say, hey, does Karma sell meat? Because it's always plants like this. So, this is probably pretty early in the season because there's pepper plants and tomato plants and stuff and the herbs along the sides. But I'm trying to maximize my space. And then all my coolers are in the back. And I'm hiding behind a sign for some bizarre reason. Yeah, go ahead.
The pickup truck, this thing that you built around the shelving, what material did you use?
It's plywood with marine paint on top.
Plywood with marine paint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're about to abandon that, though, so it's too heavy because we need to take it off in the winter when we're doing other things with the truck, like moving hay and stuff, and it's just too heavy for... It used to be fine. We'd have a party and invite all our friends over to take that thing off. People are refusing nowadays. They're like, it's too heavy, Karma. So we're going to be building something new, probably with fiberglass. Yeah. Well, it'll be expensive, but this has lasted over 10 years, so... There's another shot of the Taj. There, another crop that I grow in there that I consider one of my sort of herbal value-added products is loofahs. Loofah is a great crop in a greenhouse in the summer because they like it hot. And then I can extend the season long enough for the fruits to actually mature for loofahs. And then they just grow all up into the purlins of the greenhouse. It's magnificent. This is the Taj in the winter. I put hoops and row cover over the beds. You can see the rosemary uncovered back there. It's very minimal protection, and it works great unless the doors blow open. This is usually what it looks like in the spring when we take the row covers off. Things are, getting started, but not growing too much. And then we'll plant, like here I've planted the loofahs, getting a real big jump on the season. Oh, and just back to that question about the sides. You see I did put straw along the side there to prevent any drafts from hitting the new loofah plants, because they're a little sensitive.
I got a question. Do you provide any fertility for those perennial herbs in the Taj?
Yeah.
Like rosemary? And what would that be?
It would be composted manure, usually applied in the fall.
Every fall?
Every fall, yeah.
Just sprinkle around the base of the
Yeah,
plant?
it's all just hand done because a lot of these things are grown in so tight. We also rotate it. We flip it seasonally. So every 2 years. So you see all the perennial herbs are on the right? Well, we should be tearing those out and planting perennial herbs on the left for like 2 years.
Those rosemary?
No, we just tear them out and plow it under. We don't keep them. No, because this house has a bit of a nematode issue, and any long-term in-ground perennial house will get nematodes and other pest problems building up over the years. So this is a 15-year-old in-ground, and so there is a buildup of nematodes, and they would go on the plant roots if we moved the plants. So instead, we just remove all the plants every 2 years and plant new cuttings on the other side that hasn't had them on it. Usually grow in some brassicas in here too, so that's a whole nother thing. It's my nematode issue. This is a really important use for this greenhouse is the mother plants and the cuttings that I get off of it, as I mentioned prior. Here's some more examples of why this house and these plants have been important to me. Is there's also an amazing buildup of beneficial insects in these greenhouses. Syrphid flies. I have the largest praying mantis population in the Northeast. It's incredible. And also Argioperantia spiders have an amazing population of bugs in these, and so they usually take care of a lot of my insect problems. I'll have some aphid explosions occasionally, but generally it's a whole ecosystem in there. So there's rosemary, and that's a candy mint. It's not quite as hardy, and that purple sage isn't as hardy. Lavender's tarragon, and that's the orange balsam thyme. I do also grow herbs outdoors in the field. Usually these are ones that are more things that we cut and come again. They're not perennials, they're annuals. Dill, cilantro, chervil, things like that. There's another example of some of the herbs in the fields. That's epazote. That's one I usually grow in the field. Dill and catnip. I grow usually annual catnip, so that I can do catnip for cats. People buy an amazing amount. This is my washing station. We just built a new building, so this no longer exists, and I'll have a brand new washing station. And we use well water from our house well.
Is this the same washing station that was for the chickens?
No. Although, technically, if I cleaned it properly, it should be fine, right? But I don't. I just don't take that risk. So no, this is just a stainless steel countertop and a hose with water. It's a very low tech. We don't do a lot of fresh market vegetables. We primarily just do the herbs.
You wash them?
Yeah, we do wash them, yep, in a vat of water, and then shake them off and then put them in the cooler. Don't do that with a couple things. I don't do that with cilantro, dill, or basil. Yeah, but most of them I do. These are the baskets that I display in at farmers market. They came from Hubert, and they've lasted for years upon years. Another plastic item. I, of course, tried regular baskets, and they just, they mold, they fall apart, and you're sad. So I use the plastic ones. I've taken care of them. They're many, many years old, many generations. So just take care of them, and they'll be fine. So these are I use these half cut-off barrels to wash herbs in. These are ramps, which is one of our forest products. And then I sell them at farmers market bunched up, and these with some signage. So the thing about, and you saw my cut herb sales, it's never huge. Never. And you always take more herbs than you're going to sell, for sure. But that's where the drying and the value added came in, was I would come home with half the herbs that I took, and I don't want to feed them to the pigs. So that's why I started drying. So the drying and the value added is not the reason of the business. It's just like a residual portion of the business because I had extra herbs. Because you've got to take a lot of herbs to sell any at all. And so then you have all these leftovers. There, Rosie's hiding behind a sign too. I guess it's genetic. So this is what I do with the herbs when they come back from farmer's market, is they get hung up in my attic. This is just an attic space that's made by our two houses when we built them together. Because you can see the roof of the old house there. So on a sunny day, it warms up beautifully to about 100 degrees. You had a question?
Yeah, you said you have to take a lot to sell any. I was wondering if you could, do you think you need lots of variety to sell any, or do you need lots of a number of top sellers?
Yeah, exactly, a number of top sellers. I used to do a lot more variety than I do now, and no one appreciated them, so. I just do the fairly normal, although I do like epazote and papalo, and I do some more odder ones because people have requested them. Yeah?
What kind of container do you put your dried herbs in to sell?
That's coming up. So when they come back from market, I hang them up on these clotheslines. It's very high tech. So it's all just solar dried. I can't dry if there's no sun. So like I don't dry in the winter time. I only dry in the summer when the herbs are producing, and it's all. No, you don't. There's no thread.
So was there sun shining into the attic?
No, it's just the heat from the roof. And there's an exhaust fan at the end of the attic that pulls the hot air through. If it's getting too hot, I can turn that on. But generally, on a nice sunny day in the summer, it's about 100 degrees in there. And that's worked out really well, and there's no direct light. It's dark.
How long do you leave them in there?
Usually till the following Friday when I hang the next batch of herbs.
Do you bring your certifier into the attic to show them where you dry the herbs? Is that something they
I believe they've looked in there. Yeah. Yeah, because that system, I'm a certified handler because of that, because I make these products. So yeah, they've come and looked at that system. Yep.
If you don't have a roof, and do you do the same or pretend to do the same thing in a room with 100 degrees, for example, with good ventilation?
Yeah. The idea is to be warm with not direct sunlight. Although I know plenty of people that dry in hoop houses with success. This just was sitting here for me. I also use screens for some things that you can't hang. Like I think that might be like hibiscus flowers or something. So I use these screens also to dry certain herbs. The herbs are then stored either in buckets or in jars, depending on the quantity. They're just food grade buckets. We remove the leaves from the stems. We garble them off and then keep them in these containers before we package them up. And the one thing that I also do with these containers prior to packaging, and I put all of these in the walk-in freezer for a day. And that's just an extra vigilance to make sure there's no insects that are alive in there that might, and I'm not worried about the insect being eaten, I'm more worried about the insect reproducing in the bucket. That is, I have opened up buckets of lavender before and had them just filled with moths, and it's heartbreaking because you worked hard on that. So if you after you've done garbling, you throw all those in the walk-in freezer and freeze them, then you're much more likely to not have problems with insects. They're sealed, but you don't know what you put in there. And then they're packaged into cellophane packages. I like to use cellophane because it breathes a little bit, and if potentially the herb is not quite dry inside, it won't mold. If you put, improperly dried herbs in a plastic bag, they'll mold. But that being said, these also have to be kept dry. If they get wet, things inside will get wet, so there's a give and take on there. And then these are my current labels. It's a general herb label so that I can write whatever I need to on there, the weight, and then my lot number is the year, because I dry and sell pretty much, everything in one calendar year. This is my advertising. I don't do a ton of advertising, but I do have a plant brochure. I now have one for houseplants as well. And the plant brochure has been handy because people pick it up early in the season and they circle the stuff that they want, and then they'll come back to the stall on a Saturday and go, I want that, 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 that. So it's been a little bit helpful for that, and just to give them an idea of the variety that I have. And I won't necessarily have all that stuff at farmer's market because I have such a limited space. So then they can request it instead. Did you have a question?
Are you doing all the garbling by hand?
Yes. But it's not that much. It's not that much. Usually the intern and I sit down for a couple of good dry days in the summer and get everything garbled and packaged. Yeah, we're just not that big so that it's... Oops, I went the wrong way. No, I didn't. No, these are how I sell them at farmer's market. So these are old seed drawers that are stainless steel, and I label each one and keep the herbs in that. And that way I can stack them up in boxes and take them to farmer's market, and they're very well protected, and they don't get smashed. There's a question way in the back.
Question about the processing.
Yeah.
And the packaging. Do you need a license to process, or do you need to package them? Can you do it in a
Yeah, there's a sticky wicket.
Do you need
Okay, so now that we're on to that, yeah, I'm in a don't ask, don't tell period right now. And that's primarily because when I got my exemption, it was interpreted that I could do what I was doing. And I still hold that exemption, and I pay for it every year, and they send it to me. Anybody that's tried to get it recently is not getting it for home processed herbs. The way it used to read is that you could package dried herbs and spices under the exemption. It now reads that you can repackage and blend commercially dried herbs and spices. So they've tweaked the language just enough to indicate that you cannot do your own drying and packaging. So all of people that I have talked to over the years that say, I'm not able to get Ag and Markets to approve me for an exemption to do this. It's just not happening. You need a 20C kitchen. And that's undoable for someone of my size. Just forget it. It's on the wording right here is on the handout if anybody's interested. It's through Ag and Markets, and it would be an exemption to dry and package herbs, but I just don't think you can get it anymore. So I don't know what to say. I mean, I was in a little bit of an awkward position to ask to do this talk because I have that certificate, but I don't know if anybody can get it anymore. And so I don't know what to tell you for the culinary herbs. I mean, there's some things I do like smudge sticks and lavender wands. Yeah, you could totally do those. Those aren't a food product. There's a question here.
Yeah, do you have any sense of whether that language means that, like, if you have access to a commercial kitchen, like a shared kitchen space or something like that?
Right, where you commercially dried them?
Yeah, or like you dried it at your farm somewhere and then processed it there.
Right, so I'm interpreting this currently that I am a commercial dryer of herbs. I grow them, I dry them, I sell them. What's not commercial about that? So I'm packing of commercially dried herbs and spices. And spices are peppers and garlic. Because the next thing says you cannot dehydrate fruits and vegetables. And those are not fruits and vegetables, absolutely not. Because I do dried garlic. So, yeah, again, if Ag and Markets decided to come to a farmer's market and give me a hard time about this, they totally could. I think the interpretation could be there that I'm not doing this legally. It's all legally labeled. I grew it from top to bottom, but is it in the exemption or not? It's up to interpretation. Was there you?
Yeah, I was just curious, is your price point, a lot of the cellophane package, you got a half ounce on. Now, do you price them all the same and make the packages the weight value to that, or do you
Right.
is each thing individually priced, or?
The the half ounce are culinary herbs, and they're $4. That's a pretty big price per pound. So look, I'm not wholesaling. I'm not selling large. I'm selling little tiny packets at $4 for half an ounce for the culinary herbs. For tea, it's a full ounce of loose tea, like spearmint or whatever. And generally, they're all the same size. You know, I do bay leaves by the count, not by the weight. Because bay leaves are a real specialty crop for me, so I do those by the count, 10 for $4. So yeah, I'll kind of vary that. Sometimes if I have a low production of something, you're not going to get a full quarter-ounce packet, but everything is $4. It just makes it easy at farmer's market. And then the garlic, these are $5. Because that jar costs $1, ridiculously enough. So I don't like to do a lot of jarred stuff because the jars are so expensive. But it's difficult to do things like, I also do paprika and cayenne, because those are spices. And I use jars or plastic bags for those. Because the cellophane, like I said, it breathes, and sometimes those things will get wet inside and they'll cake. Things that herbs won't do, but like the garlic will cake. The paprika is just a hand grinder. No, it's like a coffee grinder. Yeah. I use the hand for the peppers because when you use the electric one, a lot of it aerosolizes and that hurts. But for the dried garlic, I use a commercial. But the garlic, anything like that, I use a dehydrator. I'm not hang drying those things. I'm using a dehydrator and then a food processor to grind it up. Another one of the value-added products I do are smudge sticks. Again, these are kind of a byproduct, like the Sweet Annie. Oh, come on. But people love it. But you have a ton of Sweet Annie. It becomes wild. After I take the lavender off of the twigs to make my herbes de Provence, I do smudge sticks out of the twigs. And then the white sage is the real and true smudge stick, and that's actually a little bit difficult to grow. But I make smudge sticks too, and they're $5 a pop. They're a little bit more. This is just an example of my farmer's market stall. This is like near the end. So you see all I have now are vegetables and dry herbs. It's too cold for plants. The meat's in the back. But that's what I have in the off season generally. And most of my dry herb sales are in the winter. And I just stop bringing them as soon as the fresh herbs are available because I want to keep them for when I can sell them, and I don't have fresh herbs because they keep, which is a beautiful thing.
Is your list of products on your handout?
It is not, but it's on the website. Yeah. Let's see, I'm probably almost done, eh? I want to leave time for questions. The one last thing, this is another product I want to mention just because it's another way that I can utilize those greenhouses when it's hot. Some people also do things like ginger and turmeric in those hot greenhouses in the summer. And I did that for a few years until people better at it started doing a lot of it, and I was like, oh, forget it. They're doing such a better job. But I do loofahs, and it's a nice little side kick for winter sales, especially around Christmas. A local organic loofah, what's not to love? And nobody believes that they're a vegetable. I love that. I still get that all the time. How do you grow those? Do you have water? Or what's going on? Okay, it's a vine. So growing in the high tunnel. When greens and other, basil and stuff are doing terrible that late in the season, but the loofah's like, whoa, we're doing great. So I harvested them the first week of December, so they were dried down and ready to rock and roll. And then I have to peel them and clean them and shake the seeds out, which is a nice, nice winter work.
How much do you sell your loofah for?
I have 3 sizes, small, medium, and large. Those are the largest. Those are $8. So, they're very reasonable, but they're not nearly as thick and dense as commercially raised loofahs because I don't have the season for it. They just don't get as dense here. But they're all gone. It's one of those things like I did 3 crates of them and they're gone. So that worked out fine. Another important use of all of these spaces and adding to my income is saved seed. It's really valuable for me to be able to save my own seeds, especially for things like passion flowers. I do cutting and breeding as well. I do a lot of breeding of passion flowers. So being able to have the greenhouses to overwinter those and grow those out nicely for saved seed. To get into fruit in this season is hard, so those are tropical fruits. Again, with the mother plants, was what I was going to emphasize. Look at this. I caught these 2 having sex in my greenhouse. It was amazing, and I kept going back and checking on them because I wanted to see her eat his head, and he didn't. They parted amicably. But it was very exciting. The population of mantis in the greenhouse is just phenomenal. So I do everything by hand in there. I'm terrified to like mow or weed whack or anything. Everything gets done by hand because I've actually clipped one in half while I was harvesting herbs. So I'm very careful about the insects in there. Another thing that we have that's a part of the business of all of this is farm tours. And if you have a beautiful farm that people want to see, you can actually make a little money on the side with that as well. So I do farm tours for farmer groups. I did a farm tour. We have an incredible perennial flower garden now that my daughter built. People come and look at that. We're going to do summer tours of that a little bit more as the season progresses. And she's done workshops as a VI. This is on natural dyeing. She did a workshop for children on dyeing with herbs and mushrooms. So, having these facilities, I can also use them to share with other people as well.
What do you charge for a farm tour?
For a farm tour, like a walk-around farm tour, $50. Not per person, but for a group, and that's an hour. This is the future. So that old hoop house that I've been growing in 15 years is still there. It's going to be just an unheated high tunnel, and I'm having a new nor'easter Rimmel greenhouse is going right there. And so we have a whole new greenhouse going in with proper benches, real benches. I've been working on wooden benches like this for years, so it's very exciting. That was a grant, which is really helpful. So that's it on the, I will take questions now because we're like amazingly done. Yeah.
What variety of bay are you growing?
I don't have any idea.
And are you,
Bay laurel.
you're doing it in the greenhouse?
Yep, I keep them in the conservatory. I know, I don't live in California, I wish, right? I know.
So how big
They're
are they
both
get?
about 5 feet tall, trees.
And those you're not taking out every 2 years? Or do you keep
No, because they're in pots. Yeah, they're in pots. Anything else? Yeah, way back in the back.
I actually just have a helpful tip for people who are looking for commercial kitchens.
Oh, yeah.
We don't have our own commercial kitchen space, but we have a relationship with a local church that has a kitchen that they hardly ever use. And in exchange for us being able to use it, we do a cooking demo for their food pantry that they have once a month. And so it's just really helpful if for no other reason, that's our commercial kitchen. So if there's any questions about where things are made, we always have that, regardless of how much we're actually going.
Right, very good point. No, I like that. Yeah.
Talk about some of the things you've tried that over the years you've been like, yeah, I thought it would work well, and then it just did not.
I tried dried culinary and medicinal herbs as a big part of the business. I was growing to dry, and a lot of medicinals as well. And it just wasn't profitable on my scale at all. So that's why I went to, drying what was left rather than doing it on purpose. And I think, if we were a larger operation, that we could probably have made that functional and been able to sell wholesale. And there's definitely a demand in our area. There's new herb shops popping up all the time. But I grow so little and I demand so much money for it. The wholesale herbs are like, psh, are you kidding me? I'm not paying that. So that didn't work out for us. It needed to be something smaller. And what also hasn't worked out for us is a lot of outdoor production. That's one reason why we have the Taj, because we have this wonderful creature called the tarnished plant bug. And they love herbs. They love herbs. Oh, they kill dill. They destroyed a cilantro. They destroy the basil. They leave black spots on everything. And we've been struggling with tarnished plant bug for a lot of years. And we even had a SARE grant to study it at one point. It was so bad. So one way that we have helped with that is growing them in high tunnels. And it keeps the tarnished plant bugs out just enough. And then we have those amazing predators where in the field, we were just getting so much cosmetic damage to the herbs, and herbs have to look perfect, just like flowers do. So that field herbs didn't really work for us either. Yeah.
How much do you charge for the workshops, like mushroom dyeing?
I don't even know what we did for it. It wasn't really that formal. It was a group of homeschooling moms that were like, hey, we want to do this with you. And we're like, yeah, we could do that. So we charged them $50. So, I don't do that much of it, but it's definitely something I need to do more of, especially now that we have the gardens. And so it's something I'm looking towards to the future, especially as I do less and less manual labor all the time. I'm just falling apart, which is sad. I'm only 47. But doing more and more of these things has really been good for me as a farmer. My husband continued doing, working with the cattle, loading hay, back-breaking labor, and I'm doing a little bit more, low-key stuff, and that's working for me. There's so many. Yeah.
Have you considered selling potted plants wholesale?
No, I'm just not big enough. Yeah, I mean, you saw, I jammed that thing full. No, I think direct sales work best for me because I can manage my consistency more. In such a small operation, I don't ever have 500 rosemary plants that look the same. I did them all for my own cuttings, and they vary a lot. And so I've just felt like I don't have the kind of control that I'd like to be able to do wholesale or the size, yeah.
You seem to have a real focus on the passion flowers. Is that something because you really enjoy it, or that there's a special market that you've noticed? Is it, yeah?
No,
just you love the
it's me. It's me. But, I have customers come back every year and buy a new passion flower variety. I have a lot of varieties, and I'm breeding too, so sometimes I come up with some new stuff, and yeah, it's a passion. No, because most of the ones I grow are tropicals. The Passiflora incarnata, which is the native maypop, which you would use herbally, I grow that one as well, and that's the one you would use. But most of mine are tropicals. They're for decorative purposes only. Way back. Yeah, you.
How do you sell your calendula, or what do you do with it?
Dried calendula petals in bags when I do it. Generally, I grow the calendula for myself. These days, I do most of the medicinal herbs for my livestock. So I do calendula salves for the livestock, and I do echinacea tinctures, and we grow tons of comfrey. We do a lot of medicinal herbs, but we don't sell them anymore. It just wasn't a big enough market for what I was doing. Yeah.
Have you tried summer and winter savory and lovage?
I love lovage. Lovage is fantastic. Yeah. We sell a lot of lovage by the bunch in the spring because it's one of the first spring greens, and it's fantastic. I did experiment with celery in the Taj this season.
Savory.
Oh, savory. I thought you said celery. Savory.
Summer and winter.
I have a lot of winter savory in the Taj permanent, and I do summer savory generally a little bit too, because I do an herbs de Provence mix, which is really popular, and I need savory for that. So, but they're not any bigger than my other herb sales. No, it's not particularly big. So we're totally out of time. So I will release you. Thank you for coming. Oh, and fill out your little forms, and thank you.